Okay, I opened my laptop, still waiting for my morning tea to steep, and tried to type my password 3 times rapidly before getting it right. My waking fingers clacking with the determination of a machine. The high definition snowy mountaintop and valley full of trees appeared in front of me. Friday, 8:14 a.m. in the upper right-hand corner, 94% battery icon beside it. I touched my face, adjusted my position on the wooden chair. The sun peeked through the cheap Venetian blinds, closed and hanging over the window in front of me. My small black kitchen table pushed up flush against the wall. I focused my eyes and touched the trackpad on my laptop with my middle finger, then dragged the cursor on the screen toward the bottom row of icons, and inhaling deeply, I clicked. Welcome to the second Doomer Optimism literary hour. That was the first page of the novel The Novelist by Jordan Castro, who's joining us today. My name is Donald. I'm an occasional first-time host, and I'm co-hosting with me today is Joey Keegan, who's been on the podcast before. And we're going to talk about Jordan's book. We're going to talk about Ohio, and we're going to talk about what was or still is the movement of literature of which he was a part, and whatever else comes up. So Jordan, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Are you from Ohio?
I'm from Cincinnati, yeah.
Oh, nice.
So
Yeah,
every time I ever host an episode of Doomer Optimism, it always just ends up becoming about Ohio.
nice.
Well, the funny thing is that I'm not from Ohio, but I lived in Huntington, West Virginia. I lived in Louisville, Kentucky. And one of the important characteristics of both of these places is that when you live there and you become sort of like an identified member of, Huntington or West Virginia or Kentucky or Louisville, you're supposed to really hate Ohio. That's an important part of being from West Virginia or being from Kentucky is loathing Ohio, but I simply don't. I actually really like Ohio a lot.
What do
Um,
they say? What's
the drivers are supposed to be really bad. This is a common thing. Um, they're just the punching bag for everything, right? Like West Virginia and Kentucky are these places with an enormous amount of problems, and so instead of paying attention to those problems that are kind of like of your own community and proximate to you, you project all of it onto the other guy, in this case, Ohio, for whatever reason. So
And growing up in Southern Ohio, we would always make fun of Kentucky and West Virginia.
that I completely missed all of this. I had no idea.
I mean, Northern Ohio, I've never been north of Columbus in the state of Ohio. I consider Northern Ohio like a mysterious land, basically Michigan, I don't know. So it's like spiritually distant for me, even though I like recognize you as a fellow Ohioan,
Yeah.
and instantly have good feelings towards you because of that. Like you're from Cleveland, right?
Yeah, the Cleveland area. I grew up in Solon, which is like a east side suburb, and then I lived like after high school in Kent for a year, and then in the west side of Cleveland for I don't know, a handful of years.
Okay. So, The Novelist. This is your first novel.
Hmm.
Previously, you wrote some poetry
Hmm.
and other things. I don't know how to talk to someone about a novel that you wrote, but
We I, Well, you're the host. I don't
okay.
know.
So, well, let's get around to it eventually.
Yeah. We don't have to talk. We can talk about
So
whatever.
we're going to talk about your book, and everyone, this is what it looks like. It's a beautiful cover. It's called The Novelist by Jordan Castro. Go to your nearest bookstore and buy it, etc., etc. Um, uh, the so the name of the literary movement is alt lit. Is that what it's called? Is this a regional literary movement, do you think? This is how I think of it as a total outsider. I remember reading like this stuff years ago, and it felt like a Midwestern regional literary movement with then Tao Lin as like a the exception that proved the rule.
Hmm.
Do you agree with that? Maybe
Yeah,
contextualize this stuff for our listeners who have no idea what I'm talking about.
yeah. I mean, I think like probably with all like literary movements or something, the people involved, generally bristle at whatever name is sort of given to it, and I think like alt lit is one of those things where I kind of like hear it and I cringe. But I do think actually what you said is sort of true. Like, I mean, when people started talking about alt lit and like sort of grouping different writers together, especially as disparate, from like Tao Lin to like Scott McClanahan to like even at different points Roxane Gay or like Melissa Broder or something like that. I would
It was
never
like the
understood like
HTML giant universe,
right.
right?
Yeah, exactly. And I never really understood why everyone got grouped together in the same way. Or not in the same way, but grouped together just in general. And I did have the thought that like one commonality seemed to be that it was like writers who weren't in New York or in traditional publishing, and who were just using the internet. I mean, those were like the sort of two, at least from my perspective, those were kind of uh, the two commonalities. Like other than that, it's hard for me to know, what like Blake Butler has to do with Melissa Broder has to do with Sam Pink or Scott McClanahan or something like that.
Yeah, Broder and like Butler, all that seems a totally different, like a happening at the same time,
Mm,
but otherwise distinct. Like it seemed like to me, again, as just a reader, a Midwestern thing and a
mm.
stylistic thing, but it also became like an actual collect. There was like a literary tour, right? Like it was a
Yeah,
group
yeah,
of people who did things together also.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think when I was talking to Joey when he was in New York recently, we were like walking. He was telling me that. Wait, were you at the thing too? Wait, where even was that, Joey? The reading that we met, was
That
that in?
wasn't that was in Louisville, and it must have been in like what, like 2012 or maybe even earlier than that, 2010, 2011, something like that. It
So
was super long time ago, and I mean, it seemed to me kind of, from the outside. I mean, one thing I guess is interesting is that Louisville, Kentucky, like nobody goes there to do art. It's like nobody tours to Louisville, Kentucky, to talk about literature or whatever. And one of the things that struck me about kind of whatever this world is, this sort of alt lit thing, for lack of a better term, is
I
that,
just keep
I
saying
mean,
that to make Jordan cringe as much as possible. Just like
yeah.
really hammer home that name as much as we can.
it is you. I mean, it is useful. It's like I just felt like I couldn't. I didn't want to be like saying it with my chest. Like, yes, I'm a card carrying member
Yeah.
of alt lit or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's no other word for it, and right, and so Donna's being, I guess, a little bit coy, I guess, but like, so we both stumbled on this stuff when we were both living in Lexington, Kentucky, in like 2010 or something, and
Mm.
Don would send me all this crazy stuff that he would sort of come across, like on HTML Giant or like weird writers that he was coming across, and I felt like we both just really fell in love with this stuff, and I
Mhm.
fell in love with it in large part because it formally, it was the first writing that I'd ever encountered that really registered the tenor of the age, this kind of, sort of boredom, boredom of sort of, neoliberal triumphalism in the Obama years or something like, and this kind of, this refusal to really care about the sort of political mood of the time, and instead to really just think about how much it sucked to have a dead end job, and like how boring the internet was, but how we were all on it anyway. I mean, and all of these kinds of features of life were sort of turned into art for what I thought was the first time. And
Mhm.
I was working a job at a restaurant. It felt, my sort of larger plans for life had all kind of crumbled. I was lonely and I was bored. And then I stumbled on this writing that I thought was just incredibly inspiring by other people who also just kind of lived in the middle of the country somewhere. and we're working dead end jobs and we're bored, but we're also inspired by art. And so
Yeah.
that was what, I mean, I took to it because I was like, this is incredible. Like it felt like it felt, it was like the first thing that I'd come across artistically in that time that was new, but also felt like it said something to me directly. And
Mhm.
so again, when this tour came to Louisville, Kentucky, it was interesting both because yeah, like Louisville's not a destination for for art tours at all. And it occurred to me that even at the time that there was something about what you guys were all up to, like that was it was I was thinking back and I was looking back at some of the writing that that came out of that world, and I was like looking back at, for instance, Towlin's short story Sasquatch, which was one of
Mhm.
these things that I'd come across online in like 2010 or something like that, just sort of drifted in my purview, and I loved it. And
Yeah.
I loved it because again, it was literature about working at a stupid job that you don't like, but nonetheless having human passions, etc. Um, and being and it was inspired literature, and it was inspired literature about boring middle America. And so that was the only tour that would come to Louisville, Kentucky, is a tour of people writing inspired literature about middle America.
I mean, Talon's shoplifting from American Apparel, like, seemed like it was opened a door,
Mhm. Yeah. I mean,
like an invitation to write about the present. Like I'm stealing this from a review Joshua Cohen wrote a long time ago at a Talon novel, but it's like almost everyone writes historical fiction. They just said it in like the 1990s, even though
mhm.
they're not just calling it historical fiction, because like a lot of this stuff is kind of tawdry, like dealing with like um no one wants and it's hard to write about. It's hard to set a novel in the
Mhm.
present time,
Mhm.
and so everyone gets some historical remove, and so it's an interesting like that project to like really try to write about the present.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I actually Catherine D just like had a thread on Twitter where she like asked, like last night, I think, where she like asked people for recommendations about novels that prominently feature the internet. And there was like a shocking lack of them, you know? And it was a lot of people being like, you know, yeah, most things just don't talk about the internet because it's redundant, or, people were sort of coping, you know? But I do think that at least for me, like when I first read Tao's writing, I mean, it sort of had, and I think for a lot of people, it had this kind of instantaneous, like mimetic effect where I could see myself reflected in it. I could recognize that, like, it was speaking to something current, but also, I mean, I remember a lot of the criticisms of people being like, you know, oh, the technology is going to change, or these kinds of things. People really reacted against it in a lot of ways. And I think he sort of over time has been really vindicated. I mean, even things like self promoting yourself, not relying on sort of the traditional institutional structures to like promote your writing. And it was like this huge, it's weird to even think about now, but there was, it was this huge scandal where people were criticizing him for promoting his
The
own writing.
stickers on Gawker, it's
Yeah,
office.
yeah, yeah. I mean, that was great. Yeah. Um, um, you know, uh, but people were criticizing him for promoting his own writing because this was, I guess, like uncouth or something. And now, of course, and he even had to like write this blog post sort of defending, a writer's ability to like promote their own writing and why this is okay. And now everybody does it. And I think like um, even at the time there was like all this suspicion about internet literature, and I kind of, I think, was able to, I was like 16 at the time when I like kind of got into that world, and I think it benefited me because I was able to like when I realized that all you had to do was just send writing to like email addresses and they might publish it. It was like this revelation for me. I was like, dude, that's so easy. And then I think the first one I submitted got accepted, which was like really encouraged. I felt like I got away with something. But there was this like um yeah, this I guess this sort of like reaction against a lot of what was going on, where people just thought, I don't know what they thought. They were, I guess, maybe resistant to change in the kind of like way that many people are. But yeah, I think speaking into the contemporary moment in a way that is um distinctly contemporary was like it certainly gave me permission to write about those things and take it seriously too.
I think it reached
Yeah,
its
it's
either high point or low point, depending on how you look at it.
Sorry,
With,
wait, what'd you say? I missed
I
that.
think this type of literature reached either its high point or its low point, depending on how you look at it, with Megan Boyle's live blogging,
Hmm.
which I remember I remember like when she, before it was published as a book, I remember when she was actually doing it. And
Mhm.
it's really disturbing
Yeah.
stuff, right? Because again, I'm saying I didn't actually know any of you, but it seemed like everyone was kind of spiraling out into drugs and madness.
Definitely.
And that's clear in the writing. It becomes really hard to read because it's writing about contemporary, but it's writing about people basically killing themselves.
Hmm.
But what's remarkable is how many of you came out the other side and kept writing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it was delightful. I think I was like, Joey and I were talking at some point, and I was like, all these guys are still writing. Like all the guys that we read back then never stopped.
Hmm.
And maybe someone did, but in on the whole, and I think it's really cool that it kind of had its moment where it was getting written about as a thing, and that came and it went, and then people still like that's the mark, like people are still reading, people still writing,
Hmm.
still doing things together, which is also interesting. Um, and it seemed like, at least for the most part, that people came out the other side of that really dark
Hmm.
period and kind of pulled themselves together.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of people did. I mean, some people didn't, but I think um a lot of people did. And Megan's book in particular, I feel like is almost prophetic in a certain way, like sort of setting out to kind of document every thought or thing she does with the specific intention of like changing her life and making it better. And then
Mm.
and then it just totally failing, this kind of thing where it's just like, and of course now a lot of people do that, they sort of, I mean, not to the extent that she did, but they're like, documenting the information of their lives in hopes that it will result in something that never really arrives. Um, but yeah, that book, that I agree, that book is sort of typifies the zone, I guess. Yeah.
Did any
well,
of you ever go overseas? Sorry, Joey, I'll let you do the next one, but did any of you ever go overseas? I think
I
that's the other interesting thing is that almost every sort of generation in American literature, everyone goes to Europe. Like all these great American novels about America are actually written
Right.
in Europe, and that didn't seem to, well, I guess maybe Tao did, but
Well, Tao would go to Taipei. I mean, there was actually one time when weirdly Argentina really liked, like, they did like an alt-lit anthology back in the day that they translated, and I think they translated Tao and Megan's book. And I remember um being in New York actually, on this like, you know crazy bender, and they were like supposed to go to Argentina for their like book tours or whatever out there, and then they just didn't go. They're like, they just like didn't go to the airport and just didn't go. And so yeah, it's definitely, that's a good point. I hadn't thought about that it also it is kind of distinctly American. Um, um, yeah, yeah. And I'm glad no one really, I don't think anyone ever really wrote about it that way, either as like American or regional in any way. I guess maybe part of what made it feel not especially regional to me, even though when you're talking about it, it makes sense, is just that like the internet made everything feel not flattened exactly, but like, I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what I'm trying to say. I felt like I was online, I guess. Even when we were in Louisville or whatever, like, and I guess maybe I just didn't. I was young. I didn't really understand that wasn't because the other weird piece of it, I guess, Joey, to your point about like touring in Louisville and so on, is like I like when I was really young, I was like in DIY punk bands in Ohio, and that's just like how we did things. And
Mhm.
like one of the first conversations me and Tao had over email was like about Johnny Hobo and the freight trains and like leftover crack and stuff like that. And so it never even occurred to me not to just do that, not to just kind of like go read at houses or small places and like travel around. It just felt like an extension of punk almost to me.
What's so funny about that is that Don and I once did a similar sort of thing. He used to publish a literary journal, and for the release of the third issue, we decided to go on a tour throughout the Midwest and go debate each other in various towns, sort of small cities that we like. I don't know, Cincinnati, like Madison, Wisconsin, etc. And it was just another, it seemed like there's
Champaign,
something
Urbana,
of the
Urbana.
yeah, that was one of the best spots of Champaign Urbana. Um, and yeah, and very deliberately kind of in the style of like DIY punk rock. This
What
is
would you
just
guys
kind of the thing you do.
what would you debate about?
Well, we
It
had a
sounds
debate. We framed it where we would have two people debating, and then two people who you could tap out, and then someone else would have to come in to your spot. But you could arrange it such that by the end of it, you would be on the opposite side of where you began.
that sounds fun.
And then at the end, we'd have everyone do watercolor paintings. We'd like pass out to everyone who came like watercolor paintings and have them all paint. I
Nice.
still have like the stack of watercolor paintings that people made at these tour events. I don't know where that is, but somewhere in a box.
Nice.
And Don had at one point planned to do a Kentucky World Tour where you would just go and do fun things in like all these towns in Kentucky that are all named like Baghdad, Lebanon, etc.
Paris,
Brazil,
Kentucky, Frankfurt.
Paris, Kentucky. Yeah, exactly.
They've got a
Uh,
Baghdad and a Paris, Kentucky.
Oh yeah.
Damn.
yeah. Uh, I think when I think Brazil, I think I was actually thinking of Indiana. But yeah, I mean, the crazy thing about these sort of you know upper South Midwestern states is all these crazy town names. Um, but yeah, I mean, like that kind of DIY spirit. I mean, what's so interesting about that is right. So you guys were producing this literature in a time when that had basically no purchase at all in the literary establishment. There was
Mhm.
no like DIY initiative or energy. It was all completely, everything was so highly institutionalized. And it is still basically the case. It's gotten a little bit different in as much as you guys prefigured it to a large extent what would happen with literature more generally. It would become a sort of online phenomenon. You'd have these sort of rogue figures, self-publishing things, so on and so forth. But especially at that time, you know, in the early 2000s, literature was so captured inside of like these specific magazines, these specific MFA departments, so on and so forth, that like to have a tour that did something that was like punk rock, but was like short stories and poetry was basically unheard of. Which I
Yeah.
just thought was extraordinary.
Well,
Well, there's the
how,
institution of the local poetry reading, right? That's at a
Yeah, there's
coffee
that
shop
too.
or a bar, and the poetry is almost universally really bad.
right. Well,
And
Yeah.
anyway,
I'm actually just remembering this. But there was actually a kind of besides once Tao went down to Gainesville and read it like a Planet X thing, but like at one point there was I can't remember the name of it, but some of my punk friends put on like a festival every year in Kent, like where bands would come play and stuff like that. And one year they had like Sam Pink and Tao and Megan and Noah Cicero come to like read at this big DIY punk festival. And actually another thing that I don't know another thing that sort of I guess prefigures the current moment was that Tao read from Richard Yates. I'm just thinking about this now for the first time in a very long time. But he read from Richard Yates, and there was like tons and tons of grumbling because there's like a part where someone says something like about rape or something, says the word rape. I can't remember the context, but that's actually the first maybe memory that I have of there being an inkling of some sort of some sort of issue. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean that novel generally created this sort of low level stir kind of in the like internet literary world, right? It was like this really kind of punishingly sort of, I want to say honest, but I'm not quite sure that's the right word for it, but just kind of, it was just this very blunt, frank book about this really difficult and in many ways very bad relationship that the details of which had been sort of taken to make to make this literary object, this novel. And it was interesting. I mean, I remember reading like HTML Giant and stuff like that around the time that it was published, and there was a smattering of sort of discourse about is this novel like evil, basically was the, and there was, various debates going on about it, and it really felt something like it was the kind of sort of pearl clutching, um is this art doing bad things to people, should we ban it, kind of
Mhm.
discussions that are so common today but didn't seem to be all that common back then. And I think a lot of it had to do, yeah, to some extent with Tao's outsider status to the stuff also, and that he had been sort of, he developed a kind of reputation as a provocateur. But the book, I mean, his writing is extraordinary. I mean, I said this to you, Jordan, when we hung out in New York, but like I really think that both on the level of sort of form, like as a kind of artist, as you already indicated, sort of the self-promoting his own writing long before this was even kind of a thing, but then also in the terms of content, his style, the kind of way that he would write about the sort of new age of the internet, sort of incorporating this like G chat stuff, that really, I mean, I think he's one of the most groundbreaking literary
Yeah,
artists of the last several decades, and just one of the best, like
yeah,
straightforwardly.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. Shouts out Tao.
So did you
Yeah,
guys read, were you guys reading Norman Mailer and Philip Roth? This is another thing that like never gets talked about, the like auto fiction and all this stuff. That Roth and Mailer to me, like, okay, so if you read Norman Mailer's like Armies of the Night and these novels where Norman Mailer's the main character, they're set in the present tense, when he was writing them. Roth doing the same thing. I guess maybe like showing up as Philip Roth rarely, but as Nathan Zuckerman and so on. And like Roth and Mailer seemed like the obvious like literary ancestors to a lot of these things,
I,
but
I,
maybe
I
not.
want. I've not. I've actually never read either. I know that Honor Levy, who the queen of all lit 2.0, has told me that she wants to be Norman Mailer. I mean, I don't know if that's still true, but at least as of like a year and a half or 2 years ago or something, she was telling me that she wanted to become Norman Mailer. But one of the reasons why maybe it never got put in that tradition is because Tao was like, I'm not trying to do like an identity thing right now, but it could be that he was Asian. You know what I mean? Like I think that like that people Frank Guan, I think is his name, wrote like a really interesting essay for N+1 that I thought was compelling about how like part of the animus people had toward Tao was that he was like a guy expressing like masculine desire, but he was Asian, and people don't like, generally speaking, when Asians. I think Tao doesn't isn't compelled by that argument as much, but it is interesting, where it's like people, and I guess maybe no one put themselves in that tradition with like Philip Roth and Norman Mailer, um, but that's an interesting point. Yeah.
Yeah, it would sort of prefigure, I think, something like Wes Yang's Souls of Yellow Folks book, right? This sort of curious phenomenon of this American minority sort of achieving its own voice in kind of art and literature and so on and so forth, and it being a really uncomfortable situation for everybody, and also just kind of culture more generally. I mean, like Wes isn't not so much interested in sort of books about Asian America, but in sort of like, sort of just the culture of it as it kind of comes into its own. Um, but we're talking a lot about the past, but you just published a book recently, so maybe we
Yeah.
maybe we can start to talk about your book.
Yeah.
Uh, the Novelist by Jordan Castro, featuring a character named Jordan Castro. available where you get your fine books. And I mean, I guess the thing I want to say on the front end is one of the things I found so fascinating about this book is that it clearly, has so many of the sort of features of the stuff called alt-lit. It
Which
incorporates
is
this kind of
definitely called
upset.
alt-lit.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely called alt-lit.
And I
I
think
mean,
Jordan
the
The woods
stuff.
Castro,
grow apart. Yeah.
you are really a representative alt-lit writer.
But,
That when people
yeah.
think alt-lit, they should think you, and when they think you, they should think alt-lit.
It's funny. I was like, when we were talking, I had this weird feeling where I was like, damn, I'm like 30 years old. I'm like, I feel like I'm like on some like reunion tour. You know what I mean? Like just
Yeah,
reminiscing
yeah.
about like touring and shit like that. I don't know. Anyway, sorry. We can.
Well,
Yeah.
no, no, I was going to sing more praise of your book. I mean, so in one sense, it feels so it continues in that style, right? The sort of Moo House era stuff. I mean, you can feel that same kind of certain set of stylistic innovations kind of pervading it, right? The sort of obsessive, sort of self observational mode is a big part of the book. The character who's trying to work on this novel and keeps screwing it up, um, is constantly thinking about what he's doing on the micro level, right? The adjusting yourself in your seat, touching your face, etc. It is heavily invested in what the experience of the internet is like, and in fact, I think it's one of the only books that I've read in recent history that talks about something like Twitter that gets it right, and this kind of compulsive, addictive quality that social media has, which I think you very in a way that reminds me of like David Foster Wallace making this comparison between the sort of the sort of small level psychological obsessions of like the tennis players in Infinite Jest, and then also like the halfway house drug addicts, right? You sort of make this parallel between your character's former heroin addiction, and then the sort of present day sort of internet obsession, or not obsession really, because it's subconscious, but this internet compulsion, um, and sort of making this connection to these things. So yeah, so the stylistic thing, um, the internet thing, but then also it reminds me. I mean, there are moments that remind me so much of like Dostoevsky. It seems to draw from a very deep artistic well, that isn't just this sort of following in this tradition of like internet literature from the 2010s or something. It really seems like you were engaging with a sort of bigger sort of tradition of literature. You mentioned Thomas Bernhard a couple of times, right? Sort of Euro pessimism, um, transported to an American context, seems a big part of it. All
You
that's to
could
say, the
say it's
book rules.
alt-lit grown up.
Thank you. What's
Yeah,
that?
yeah.
It's alt-lit grown up.
Yeah. Yeah. When you were talking, I was thinking of like, I wanted to puff my chest and like Kanye, be like, I am David Foster Wallace, I am Dostoevsky, this kind of thing. Um, anyway, sorry, were you?
Well, I guess the point that I was getting to is I mean, to a certain extent, right? Like it does feel like something like alt-lit grown up or something, but I guess I would frame it as something like this is the first book that I've read where it feels like, right. So alt-lit was taking features of life in the early 2000s and turning it into art, and it was still kind of finding itself. Like a lot of the stuff, like looking back at stuff like Brandon Scott Garrell's book and sort of Megan Boyle's books, right? All that stuff is super interesting and fun, but it, especially in hindsight, it looks like it's art striving for something that it didn't quite achieve. And in your book, I feel like it really did it.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's like a really like in turn like it makes um it makes the experience of the internet age legible to me for the first time, right? Like you can write a million nonfiction books about what the internet is doing to us or whatever, but none of it quite showed it to me in the sort of stark detail that your book did. And then I don't know, there's this weird quality of it where it's you so effortlessly write about what it's like to sort of navigate all these. I mean, almost like like it's almost like a Dantean kind of, you know, journey through the
I'm Dante
various
too. I'm
circles
Dante
of
too
hell.
now.
You're Dante too, hell yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
But right, so you crack open Facebook and you talk about what Facebook is like and how it's a specific sort of zone of the internet where people post in a particular kind of way. And you have this amazing description of like for whatever reason you become fixated on this former classmate of yours and her you describe her face as like waxy. It's just like this wonderful thing and you're like, who is this person? Why do I have any connection to her? Why is she always posing with these like really thick men? They all look kind of the
Okay, by
same.
thick, can I ask a question about that?
Yeah.
What do you mean by thick? Because that could mean like, do you mean like muscular thick men or like big bellies? Like, what do
Well,
you
not,
mean by
yeah,
thick?
not big bellies. I was imagining like guy who was jacked in high school and is still
Mhm.
kind of jacked, but not really
Okay,
that
yeah,
jacked, and maybe like a North Face or whatever.
Yeah,
okay.
that's exactly what I pictured. I mean, I could like as you were describing these things, I like knew I could just like the image was so clear to me. In large part, I think because this is, I mean, I had this similar sort of experience with the internet, which is like I pop onto Facebook, I stare at it for about 5 minutes. I don't want to be on it, but for some reason I am. I'm like scrolling through, and there's like six people that I went to high school with that I don't even have anything in common with anymore. We don't actually talk, and there's no reason why I should know anything about their life, but for some reason I'm like weirdly compelled to continue to do it. And then I
Mhm.
close that, and then I open up Twitter, and then it makes me miserable for about 3 minutes, and then I wonder why I use it anyway, and then and but like capturing that experience like I have not, again, I have not come across a piece of writing that could that detailed the experience of the internet now, like what it's like to be on the internet today, as I have your book. um
Thank, thanks, man.
it,
Can
Uh,
we
it was
talk about,
painful at times, but
yeah.
can we talk about this? I think, like, reading your book, I'm on page 68, by the way. Joey tells me it gets better. I haven't got to the Dante and Dostoevsky part.
Yeah.
You're not Dante yet. I don't know. We'll see if you get, we'll see if you get there. That's a high bar you're setting, Joey. Um, but at least the first 68 pages, it read to me as a chronicle of like brain damage. I don't know how else to put it.
Yeah.
Of like the like it was a chronicle of someone who's being destroyed by whose like capacity to think and act is being destroyed by the internet. And so I want to talk to both of you about this. So I don't know how long ago it was now, 2 months ago, something. I like nuked Twitter, which I'd done before, but I did again. But I did it because I really felt like I was lobotomizing myself. I don't know how else to describe it. Like I felt like I was actually
My my wife calls it,
lobotomizing myself.
Nicolette calls it erasing herself.
And so I nuked it, and now I'm like um building my mind kind of, and which has been really nice. Like reading like I found like I'm reading poems again, which is like reading poetry again. And like reading like the like essays of Jeffrey Hill and like different things that are kind of like not read in a long time. Um, but I'm just curious about like if you to like have that feeling like I really felt it distinctly. I was like, I am destroying, like I'm not gonna be able to think at all if I keep doing this. Like I really felt like a very stark, like I need to stop this now
Yeah.
while I'm still have something left,
Yeah.
or else I'm done for. But I don't know if you two have had that experience. Have you ever like made the, you know,
Yeah,
the cut
definitely.
and walked away, and like did you have to, like were you able to, in order to finish writing this, did you have to like step away from the internet? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I mean, I like usually for Lent I'll get off for like 40 days. And not this past one, but the one, I can't remember which one. At one point I was like, I was off and I was like you said, reading poems. I was writing poems again, like sort of like, about like, you know, just weird, like earnest feelings and like, whatever, nature imagery, this kind of thing. Like after like 20 days of being offline, I was reading more. And I stayed off. I stayed off for actually a while. Like my old accounts are gone and this kind of thing. I only came back on to like promote the novel. And my plan was to get off. And then of course, like I didn't get off and now it has its hooks in me again. But I completely relate with like, being off and my sort of like uh inner life and also just the kind of like facts of my life that I'm more present with, with my wife or whatever. Um, but I do think that like one of the things that I tried to do with the novel, which I think maybe Joey you were pointing toward, was like I think when I was writing when I was a teenager and like reading a lot of the kind of 1.0 stuff, I became really disillusioned with it. The all at one point, I became really disillusioned with it because I think the hope or the thought of a lot of people then was that like there was something just good about like documenting things or about like being honest, quote unquote, about like, certain details of one's like daily life or whatever, and that there would be some sort of redemptive quality or that there would be some, this would like necessarily lead to change or something good. um and then I had many years there where like in between where I sort of like wasn't writing that much and kind of like changing and growing and so on. And I think like what I tried to do was like infuse, and maybe this is why Don, you felt like it was a chronicle of brain damage, because like I tried to infuse um the using the internet and trying and failing to write and stuff with a perspective from outside of itself, as opposed to just like documenting things as they occur, which is like partly what I did. Like I really tried to sort of mindfully pay attention, like, okay, what's actually going on when I'm trying to do something productive, and I like basically black out for 30 seconds to 5 minutes and like find myself scrolling, trying to like recreate the actual like mechanics of what happens and in my mind and also like concretely. But I think like for things generally speaking like that to have value or to at least be illuminated, they have to be illuminated by some sort of other perspective, you know what I mean? And so I think that's definitely what I tried to do. And I think like engaging, like you said, with sort of more I always say that like I got my educate quote unquote education, my like self education like backwards, where like when I was younger, I just like read a bunch of contemporary stuff and so on. But then the more I started to engage with people like Dostoevsky or I mean, or Dante, I mean, I didn't actually think of Dante, but reading Dante, but reading things out of this tradition and sort of realizing that they had a perspective on the things that I was thinking about and going through, and a sort of corrective to this sort of extreme relativism or this like or this all this stuff, this sort of nihilism, whatever. There's a perspective that actually shed light on the things that I was that were happening, online, but also in my life. And so I think that is sort of I sort of went on a tear there, but yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking about and trying to do. But the short answer is I was just actually telling Nicolette that I was like, it might be time for me to delete again. I don't want to, like, now it's like I'm kind of like, I don't know. It's hard because I do feel like I'm frying myself. You know what I mean? I don't know. What about you, Joey? Do you feel
Yeah.
like yeah, do you feel
Uh,
you
I have
fried? You
difficult, I
seem
mean,
like you're
I
kind of
clearly have difficulties with it. Um, I've stepped back from it recently and I've picked a really fortuitous time to stop using Twitter, in as much as a lot of really bad things just happen, and Twitter's the worst when things are actually happening in the world, because everybody just turns psychotic. And I found in the last, I mean, it's only been like a week or so when I kind of like made this decision to step away from it, and I mean, I have a real, it's maybe easier for me because I have this really great reason to focus my attention elsewhere, which is my baby daughter, um, who's a million times more amazing than anything on the internet could ever be.
I don't know.
And that's right. But I mean, I'm also in a really lucky position. Like we made a decision really early on that like, this seems like the sensible and obvious thing, but this isn't the thing a lot of people do, but that our daughter would not be at all a part of our sort of internet life. So I've never, it's never even like occurred to me to like want to post a picture of my baby on Twitter publicly or anything like that. So already, there was this gap. We sort of maintained this boundary between our sort of normal, real domestic life and then the sort of life on the internet. And just as like, I don't know, as the baby started growing up, it just became more obvious that devoting my attention to the opinions of a bunch of crazy people is not really the best way to spend one's time. But I do want to read a section of your book, if that's okay, that I think really kind of captures this experience of like being sort of helpless in the face of the internet, like the way that it kind of just like constantly pulls you in. This is when you're
Joey,
when you sort of like looking at it. Yeah,
before you read the
please.
section, I don't want you to read it. I want to give anyone out there listening the instructions for how to nuke your Twitter account from orbit in a way that is that you can never get it back. Okay? So here's what you do. You open a burner email account on like Proton Mail or something. Okay? You give the email account a long nonsense password that you'll never remember. You switch your Twitter account to that email address, and then you also give your Twitter account a totally nonsensical password that you'll never remember. You can like copy and paste it if you had to put in, and then log out of both the email account and the Twitter account. You have no way to log back into either of them ever again. Nothing you do will ever bring any of it back. It's gone forever.
I somehow didn't follow what you just said. Did you follow Joey? Did you understand what he was saying?
Yeah, but I only know this because he told me about this. He did this with a previous account
Yeah, so
before
you
and then
nuke
made a
it
new
from
one
orbit.
after
So
that.
like you switch the email account associated with your Twitter account,
Oh, okay. That's the part.
burner email.
That's the key part I missed. That's the key part I
Yes.
missed. Okay, I
And
understand.
then you make it so you don't know the password to either one, and then you'll never be able to. It doesn't matter if you change your mind; it's gone. Like there's no way to retrieve this.
Yeah.
So
So
okay,
let me.
Joey, please read the passage. But I just wanted to anyone out there who's like, you delete it, and then a week later you restart it again or something. If you do this, you'll never be able to log back in again, unless I guess you could
Let,
create a new account. But
let me know before I read this. I mean, part of my difficulty with Twitter is that it's actually been really amazing for my life. And that, for instance, Jordan and I would never talk to each other without Twitter. Like we had this brief random sort of like ships in the night kind of passing in like 2011 or whatever at this tour in Louisville, but then, we didn't know each other at all, but we were able to like meet and talk with each other, um, and arrange this podcast, et cetera, because of Twitter. A huge amount of like the actual concrete good things in my life, with a few notable exceptions, mostly my marriage, um, which it has nothing to do with the internet. But a lot of the great things in my life are sort of products of spending time on Twitter and talking to people. A lot of the people that I know in person who have become really genuinely good friends are people that I met through the internet. So I have a deep ambivalence about it because I do think that it it can occasion an enormous amount of good, but at great peril. And I think what your book does so wonderfully is that it shows what that peril is, right? So that there's a possible trade-off, and the trade-off has a lot to do with your attention. Um, so maybe I could read this section that I think is like a really great sort of representation of the way that you sort of articulate what it's like to experience the internet. So this is your character has struggled for a while to try to actually open the Google Doc where the novel that he's working on exists, and instead keeps opening other things. And right now he's scrolling through Twitter, a place that he navigated to without really wanting to in the first place. So you say, now on Twitter's homepage, I scrolled, quote, everyone wearing fanny packs this year would have ridiculed anyone wearing fanny packs 5 years ago. You are all horrible, end quote. A picture of a clothed chest with an I voted sticker on it. Quote, dance for joy, Coffee Mate seasonal flavors are back, with a gif of a cartoon coffee cup dancing next to a giant Coffee Mate creamer bottle, a blurb for a forthcoming novel. Quote, I can't believe food costs money, end quote. Quote, A is just short for amen. Quote, I've seen the word neckbeard used to refer to antithetical things, end quote. These are all various tweets that you see. I grinned. I slid two fingers forcefully upward on the trackpad and then held them there, the heel of my hand anchored to the base of the laptop. Tweets scrolled by, blurred like one mass of text until everything stopped. I really did not want to be looking at Twitter. I tried to think of something but couldn't remember what I was trying to think of. Perhaps I hadn't wanted to think of anything specifically. I visualized getting up, going to the bedroom, picking up The Mezzanine by Nicholson Baker off the bedside table. Was it on the bedside table? Then walking to my reading chair, sitting in my reading chair and reading it. Reading a novel might help me refocus the morning. My novel, I recalled with trepidation. My novel was what I'd been trying to think of and why I had wanted to focus in the first place. My novel, which had been making me feel dejected and unwell due to its badness, was the opposite of The Mezzanine. My novel was not cerebral or immaculate like The Mezzanine, and due to its having been written in the third person present tense by me, had no texture or insight at all. I would begin work on my novel now, I resolved. Perhaps I could try to channel The Mezzanine. I began moving the cursor around Twitter's homepage in an aimless, vaguely circular manner, flinging my pointer and middle fingers in small twitching spurts, like watching the cursor flail on the screen like a fly against the window. I stalled for a few seconds this way, scanning but not reading tweets, then clicked Gmail, then Twitter again, in less than 1 second. I scrolled Twitter and saw tweets about Donald Trump, retweets from accounts I didn't recognize, and one tweet that included the word hot. My back and jaw clenched as I passively registered the barrage of awful content. I didn't so much process the tweets as absorb the tone and length of them. I felt increasingly like I was staring at the screen from a face that was not my actual face, but was somehow behind or inside of my face, my second face, like I was inhabiting an auxiliary body inside of my body. My outer body was the anchor, operating independently of me. I was somewhere inside of myself, behind my outer face, my skin face. There was no conscious sensation in my hands. I'll stop there. I mean, it's such, yeah, this thing, just like knowing at the moment that you're doing this thing that you don't want to be doing it, and you resolve to do something else, but then you're just sort of sitting there like swiveling the thing around. And then also this image of kind of the second face shows up a whole bunch in the book, at least a couple of times, of feeling like you've got this, that you have like this exterior skin face that's sort of there and feeling, and then there's another one on the inside.
I forgot that I put skin face in there.
It's great.
I mean,
Yeah.
one thing when I saw the movie Get Out afterward, I was like, oh damn, that's kind of like, did you guys see that movie where the
I
guy,
haven't seen it, no.
never mind, it's not worth getting into, but I was like, they kind of do I mean, they don't really do it, but they kind of do a second face thing. I think I can't even really remember, but where the guy's sort of like inside of himself, kind of like distantly, kind of like,
Yeah, but that's such a great, I think, image of this, this feeling of being kind of imprisoned inside of your own body as it's kind of acting against your will, sort of moving this, but not even doing anything interesting. It's not even like like you're in, I don't know, being forced to march through mud or something or whatever. You're just sort of sitting there, moving, and you note like the specific physical actions that are demanded of, like, placing your hand on the trackpad and the way your fingers move, and right, this kind of hyper specific description of like of life online. I mean, for one, I really feel like after I read the book, I mean, I think reading your book was one of the things that made me realize that I probably need to stop using the internet so much, right? That it held a mirror up to me and allowed me to kind of see with clarity, the sort of ridiculousness of constantly being online. That's a really difficult a difficult image to see of yourself, in as much as when you're using it, it really does have this feeling of I'm not doing it, but this thing outside of me is doing it, and the real me is inside and is thinking thoughts and doesn't want to be doing this in the first place. Um, but yeah, just to give that image of like the internet using person, I thought was just magnificent.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things, that I was interested in, and I think it is one of the kind of just main themes in general, of a lot of the writing that I like. I mean, I was thinking about like Newt Hampson's Hunger. I don't know, have you read that novel at all? Or like
I read Growth of the Soil.
oh yeah, that one's great too.
I
Yeah.
haven't read Hunger yet.
But just these depictions of people who, and I mean, it's just, it is the I read Faulkner's like Nobel Prize speech the other day for some reason, and he said something like, I don't know, I'm going to butcher the quote, but something like the contemporary writer has like lost the sense of the heart conflicted with itself, which is like the only thing, the only valuable subject of literature, or something like that. And like for me, I was really interested in like these moments where like action and thought, there's something in between, in the space in between action and thought, and like, you can be like in small ways throughout the day, like doing things quote on sort of against your will, sort of like that. I think it's Paul who has the line where he's just like, I do the things I don't want to do and I don't do the things I do want to do, or something like that. And I think like one of the things that I noticed when I was really like trying to like quote unquote observe myself and my behavior online and generally, was that there was these moments all the time throughout the day where it was like where it was like one can be truly at odds with themselves, and it is a sort of pathetic state, you know what I mean? Yeah.
This is just occurring to me now, but so the Desert Fathers talk about logismoi and like battling like idle thoughts, and the idle thoughts is the entry point for demons. And it seems sort of similar to that way.
Say more about what's the word that you said?
Logismoi, I think is the, so it's something, I mean, what exactly, it doesn't see the way they talk about it, it doesn't seem like our idea of stream of consciousness was how they thought. Like it might be that stream of consciousness, I'm taking this from I read this as some like Orthodox writer was talking about this, that the idea of stream of consciousness
Wait,
might.
are you Orthodox?
Am I? Yes, I am.
Nice, dude. I'm a catechumen.
Okay, cool. Very
Yeah,
good.
yeah, yeah.
That stream of consciousness might not have been like a literary innovation to describe something that people have always done. Rather, that kind of thinking may have been new. And then writers were like writing about something that was itself novel. Does that make sense? Like the way the Desert Fathers talk about it, they seem to have one thought at a time. Like they don't just have this like stream going, but nonetheless, like there's this idea that, okay, so the Desert Fathers are sitting in like caves and like rough huts and stuff in the Egyptian desert. And they're, doing spiritual labor and aesthetic labors. And they're really concerned with, not letting their mind go blank and not just letting their thoughts go idle, because when that happens, you open yourself up to demonic influence. Rather, like the Christian prayer tradition is not to like empty your mind. I think that's like a Buddhist idea. It's like not to empty your mind, a very dangerous state to be in actually, but to have continual prayer.
Yeah.
But
Sorry, go ahead. I was gonna
this sort of thing, activity that this novel describes seems like it, I don't know, it's almost like it like opens you up to all kinds of weird, like having this sort of uncontrolled thinking And like the character describes himself as like acting as though bidden by something outside of him, like he's not in control
Hmm.
of his body or his thinking. Uh,
Right.
and this connection didn't occur to me until just now, but
It's an interesting, it's definitely, it's an interesting connection for sure. I mean, I've thought a little bit about how, in relation to something like live blog or something like a lot of the kind of all lit stuff, but also, yeah, just in general, the sort of thinking and sort of productive mode that we've been talking about is like there's this mask of like authenticity or honesty where it's like I'm telling you how much of a bad person I am, or I'm telling you all this type of stuff, but there's something that gets obfuscated when because you're making a claim about what's real, right? You're saying like, I mean, you're still selecting things to report or to, express or whatever, but when it comes to like thinking, I think that that's an interesting point about stream of consciousness being new, because I think that it seems right to me that, you know, one of the things that kind of plagues contemporary people, or at least me, is this sort of like what Kierkegaard would call the reflective age. It's like abstraction, sort of tyrannizing the individual, reflecting in on itself endlessly. So you have these like meta layers of self-awareness and so on. And then you have that reflected back to you on a screen, or you're always sort of aware of the presence of the other. Like I won't, sometimes when I'm tweeting a lot, I like start seeing tweets like everywhere I go, not like visualizing them, but like everything gets like filtered through like a tweet tone or tweet possibility. And so I'm like engaging with the world in a way that does seem distinctly, I mean, in some ways these are, whatever, we're people and the problems we have are eternal, but in other ways it's like the way that I can like engage with I can look at a flower and think about, taking a picture and where should I post it and who might like it or this kind of thing. I don't know. It feels sort of related to what you were just talking about, and it does make it difficult. I mean, like, yeah, the sort of Christian idea that like, yeah, you shouldn't empty your mind, you should fill it with the things of God. You should, whatever is good, whatever is true, this kind of thing. Yeah, anyway, and a lot of the time self reflection or these meta layers of self-awareness kind of, I think, at least for me personally, they can really block me off from um that spirit and that like connection. Yeah.
it's like the
I
idea
won't
of dying to
spoil.
self. Anyway, Joey.
I was gonna say I won't spoil the end of the book, but I will just note that, um, right. So your character goes out for a walk with the dog, and is trying to just kind of leaves his phone at home deliberately, and is trying to just sort of enjoy the world, and even then is constantly kind of nagged by the absence then of the phone object, and it's sort of always like it's like, oh, I should make a note on my I just had this thought, I need to make a note, and reach for his pants and slap his thigh and realize it's not there. And like even then you sort of see this continuation of the sort of the consciousness shaped by the internet continues out in the ostensibly real world, and the sort of, yeah, this kind of like nagging presence of the online becomes a kind of ghost that haunts him, in the very end of this book. And it was uh very effective and affecting ending. um
And I gotta say, I'm
uh
really grateful for you reading this thing and saying all this stuff, man. It's like it's really nice to hear the way that you read it and saw it, and so like I sincerely appreciate it. It's like it's humbling, and I yeah, thank you.
no, of course, and I'm not like BSing you either. I mean, I wouldn't be talking about it if I didn't think it was a really good book. I don't just like gas people up because they're a guy that I know. I mean, I think it really does grab something very like real and urgent about life in our age, and and sort of what all these communication technologies are doing to our attention, and then this, sort of what is downstream of of this sort of destruction and degradation of our attention. Um,
It's also funny.
I, it's hilarious. I mean, it's unbelievably funny. I want to ask a little bit. I mean, there was a moment where your character does actually uh, get enough sort of attention to like start writing something. He starts to write a different book. Then he's just like, oh, I got to leave that other novel behind. He tries a couple of times. He tries to change the sort of perspective to write not in the third person but in the first person, et cetera. And you have a lot of really interesting thoughts in that section about these different perspectives and how you can write from them. But then he cracks open a new book and just starts writing. This basically just like he says it's gonna be like Thomas Bernhard's The Woodcutters, and he just like tears into this guy that he doesn't like. Uh, and I guess what I thought was interesting about that, and I'll try my best to sort of frame this as a question, is this is like the moment that finally he gets enough enough like sort of reserves of attention. He can channel his attention finally into working, and what he channels it into is like this tirade against a guy that he doesn't like, and uh, and there's something deeply pathetic about it. Um, Even if he's like some of the stuff that he says is he has these interesting criticisms of like sort of I don't know, sort of art scene people, right? And some of that stuff I think is makes it makes sense as a kind of criticism, but it's clear that he's projecting something outward, and so he's able to kind of muster the sort of strength to do something, to write something, and it ends up just being this like long insulting tirade about this other person who's like another writer. So I guess I wanted to like I wanted to ask about like what's going on in that section, because it's all kind of, again, it's all framed, and like otherwise he's totally unable to do anything for any period of time without being distracted by like a notification or just like the sort of desire to crack open the internet. This is the one time that he can finally do it. So
Yeah.
I don't know. Help me
And
understand it a
who is
little
it
bit
based
better.
on? Who's the guy he hates based on?
Name and shame. No, you don't have to.
Yeah, I don't want to. I because like the thing, the way that I justified it to myself, at least, was like, you know, actually, weirdly, this British academic guy who wrote a good novel called Dead Souls. He guessed. I never met him before. Never talked to him before. I met him at a bar one night, and he guessed instantly who it was, and I was like, oh shit, it's that. It's that. It's that. But no, uh yeah, I'm not gonna do that. But uh yeah, I mean, I was sort of thinking about like a couple of things. I mean, one was that well, first of all, I guess if I'm being like honest, I think the rant that you're talking about was like the first thing of the novel that I wrote. Like, and it wasn't like I didn't think it was going to be a novel at the time, but I was like, just like writing, like really ranting about this guy that I really thought was just pathetic and a horrible person, sort of like just became kind of like the worst. Woke is a bad word, but he just became total scum, and and at one point I realized as I was writing this novel that I could just sort of insert like rants about things if I like kind of constructed the novel around them or whatever. But then eventually over like the years of working on it, I did sort of start to feel like there was a kind of like because I have that experience. I have had that experience where like my attention is completely fragmented and pulled a million ways, and there's this kind of like you know almost like online, there's this like mimetic fever dream of this like tension just building and so on. And then like I tried to kind of do this in some small way, like a Gerardian thing where he like basically unleashes it on a scapegoat. I think in the novel, there's stuff about how the narrator and the guy like used to be very similar or in various ways and so on. And I sort of like I think over time as I worked on the novel, yeah, I kind of realized that like while some of the things that the narrator says are true about him and about this kind of condition of like the enlightened um woke white guy or whatever, um there's also some sort of like I mean the guy has been trying and failing to write a novel all day, and he's just been slamming caffeine, and then he just chimps on someone who's like not even there. And I think like yeah, I mean that's sort of those are some things I was thinking about. I don't know if that really answers it or illuminates it at all, but
Yeah, it's helpful. I'll also note this is the point I think where the Dostoevsky influence felt the most obvious to me, because it really felt like that section of the Underground Man, like the opening of the Underground Man, where he's just ranting about all these people he dislikes, and it reflects upon him as this kind of pathetic, sort of hateful sort of character, but a perceptive one, right? And
Mhm.
there's something. I mean, Dostoevsky sort of haunts me in this respect, that the underground man, for however I don't know, kind of like repugnant he is as a kind of person. There's something that repugnance grants him a sort of vision into the heart of things, at least for these little glimmers, and it's sort of the same for your character in the book, that um, there's something he's able to see about like the functioning of the world, um, that he's sort of given the ability to see it by, I don't know, like it's almost like the entire first part of the book and kind of his like bizarre meanderings through the internet. Like that's what allows him to be able to see that this guy's like totally bogus.
Mhm.
Um, but then in kind of writing it, it also reflects poorly on him. I don't know. It's a really complicated. I mean, I think this is to say like the book is very complicated too, and rich and strange. Um,
Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
I think that's at least for me, I think that's like the goal of writing literature. Gerard has this like first of all, have you his book about Dostoevsky is great. Resurrection from the Underground. I don't know if I don't know if you've read it, but it's like it's
I haven't
completely,
read it.
for me, it's really short and it's like completely illuminating about particularly the underground man, and that he talks about like underground psychology almost as this sort of like psycho spiritual kind of like condition almost, which he associates with like pride and the nature of pride and so on. But one of the things that he says about novels is that he thought that for the great novelists, like Dostoevsky, that their first drafts were attempts at self-justification, that like you're scapegoating someone or something, and then you have what amounts to like a sort of novelistic conversion, and you like come out of the other side. And he says that the great novelists are then able to describe the evil of the other from within. And I think for me, that really was, I mean, not to like say I'm a great, whatever, but but for me, that really was my experience of writing this, where it was like over time, because it's like multiple things can be true at once. You know what I mean? Where it's like, okay, some of this is true, but it can also be true that what's motivating this critique is maybe some sort of private, personal resentment, or like a insecurity about one's own personal failures or whatever. And so like all these things can be kind of this sort of constellation of various things that like seemingly are in contradiction, but in reality exist together. And I think so much of what is wrong with a lot of the way people read and write now is that it's fundamentally like ideological. It's one note. It's sort of like, there's the good guys and the bad guys, or the oppressors and the victims, or something like that. And
It's all YA literature.
yeah,
All literature is like young adult literature, right?
dude, yeah, I think I could say it's fine. Nicolette teaches a class. Actually, wait, I shouldn't say this. Never mind. I mean, I can't be talking crap about my wife's students like while she's here. Basically it is that it's that they've all only, many of the most belligerent and like aggressive and like reactive students have really only read like YA or fan fiction and stuff like that. They had, she's been teaching Flannery O'Connor and Nabokov and people like that, and and they'll just be like, like this is, they'll just react against it. And when she'll ask like, well, what do you like to read? They're like, Harry Potter and YA, and it's like it's depressing. You know what I mean? Especially when it's like married to that like belligerent. Oh, I'll stop there.
I met a
Yeah, well,
professor
it's a
who taught Ovid. She was a classic professor, and she taught it once, and she had students actually throw the book at her, the
Dude,
Metamorphosis at her, because they were so upset with how often rape was. It's true, and she goes, "Well, did it ever occur to you that like Ovid wanted you to be angry about it?"
right. There, no,
Like that
there,
there's a range of like that your response might be exactly what he was attempting to elicit or not, but that it's at least a plausible
they're the first. Look, people 23 and under today are the first people to think that rape is wrong, and you know what I'm saying. They're the first people to think that that justice and so on are good.
But it's interesting. Well, on that subject, everyone should go out and read Tocqueville about American attitudes about
Man,
race in the 19th century, which he is alarmed by the rapidity and violence of Americans like punishing rapists. Anyway, that's like you know
interesting.
19th century America. The thing I was saying earlier about the stream of consciousness, just to toss it out there, if you or anyone is interested, I recalled what book I read about that in, which is a book called Bread and Water, Wine and Oil by Archimandrite Meletios Weber, which is an interesting Orthodox spiritual book, but Bread and Water, Wine and Oil, which is a great title. You know, I wonder, like, I share your antipathy towards ideological writing and reading. I wonder how it seems like that, and the fever is kind of broken on that a bit. That it turned out not to produce really any books, like any like actual books. Like that, it seems like there's nothing to say about it. Like, what is there to say? And so it turns out not to produce either writers or readers. And so it seems like there's no actual energy in it anymore. There was briefly, maybe, but it kind of burned itself out because there's nothing to say. And so now, yeah, some people have like institutional whatever, but in terms of actual energy and people writing and reading things, it seems like that stuff is totally an afterthought, and that everyone realized, oh, we can just keep reading and writing books, and it doesn't matter what people who are on that thing say, because they don't read anyway and they
Yeah,
don't write anyway, so who cares?
yeah, yeah. I mean, I definitely think there, and I'm very grateful that there's more energy that kind of like exists apart from that mode. I am a little bit more. It's hard because I often feel that way too, where I'm like, it's over, we're free at last, but I don't know. It's so institutionalized, it's so easily weaponized, and yeah, I'm not sure. What do you think, Joey?
Yeah, I think that you're too optimistic, Don. I mean, just a couple of years ago, there was that New Yorker short story cat person that got like super famous, and they just made a multi-million dollar movie out of it and stuff. And
No one's
and
gonna
what I
go
thought
see
was,
it. No, there's no
I mean,
audience.
no one's going to see the movie, but a lot of people did in fact read the story, and a lot of people did in fact read the book that came out from that woman wrote, and
Really?
like,
Like, has anyone talked
yeah.
about it in years? I don't know. I just really don't think any of this stuff, like like what gets taught. Okay, I learned this from someone who runs like an online literary magazine. There's no correlation between actual like reading of things and how often they're shared on social media. Like those are two totally distinct numbers. That there are things that get like bandied about
Oh,
on, but
well,
that doesn't actually reflect what people, you can like use analytics and see what people actually read. Totally separate numbers.
this is weird because my friend Michael Clune recently published this, like, it seemed like for a while there he was publishing essays like every other month, and like he had like the most read essay, I think, on the Chronicle of Higher Education website ever. Certainly in the, yeah, there it is, white out Michael Clune. Yeah, nice. He's shouts out Mike, but so it was, I believe, the most read on the Chronicle ever. And I searched the link on Twitter. There was like no tweets about it. And then there was another one that he wrote that was like one of the most read on, I don't remember, another website. And I searched the link. There was like no tweets about it. And I was like, how is this even I sort of I see what you're saying. I mean, it's weird. Yeah.
There's this
There's like a
false
discourse
world of
bubble.
like what journalists tweet and write about that has almost no correlation to what people actually read and view. In the same way that the television program Girls, which got, like more written about it than any other cultural artifact in history, and that had almost like minuscule actual viewership.
Hmm.
But I don't know. But then some things get neither written about nor read. Like William Vollmann's The Dying Grass, which is like, I think, the most serious, interesting American novel probably of the century so far, which, as
Hmm.
far as I can tell, no one has either read or written about. But thank God that his editors keep letting him publish these like enormous books that probably don't sell very well anyway. Uh,
I mean, I do. You are right that there's like that the spheres of like things that people actually read and the things that the critical apparatus is sort of chattering about are like non-overlapping in many ways. But I do think that the kind of YA good and bad guys, like the noble hero against like toxic garbage person sort of structure of book is still pretty popular. And not just with young people. I think actually the readership of a lot of stuff that's billed as YA is actually like sort of millennials, like 30 some odd people who just kind of given up reading difficult stuff, and it's kind of like watching TV for them and so on and so forth. But I'll also know, I mean, alongside kind of that popular tendency in book publishing and literature, there's kind of this other thing which is kind of like depressive autofiction. This is like a big deal. Um, and
And it's
this I think actually
over. I put the
there's
nail in
always
the coffin.
yeah, you did it. You ended it
It's
forever.
over.
I was gonna say, I mean, it bears some kind of dim resemblance to like alt-lit stuff,
Yeah.
right? It sort of moves in a similar kind of I don't know, sort of nexus of emotions to a certain extent. It's sort of, this reflection upon contemporary life. In many ways, it has that kind of honesty that you were talking about um, that may or may not actually be a good thing, or artistic, whether morally or artistically or whatever. But that stuff I think is read a lot, especially by college students and college graduates. There's like, what is it, Otessa Bosfag, or I don't know how you pronounce her name correctly. She's kind of writes My Year of Rest and Relaxation. Huge book, very popular.
Yeah.
she's
There's a
interesting, I
She is
think.
interesting, yeah, she is interesting.
That essay she
I,
wrote about, like, I think hanging out with Philip Roth, she doesn't name Roth. It's a very interesting essay.
Hmm.
but there's kind of this whole world of sort of that stuff that is really popular too, and it seems like it. I mean, everybody I've ever known who's like really invested in that stuff, like smokes too much weed and um, has maybe like a master's degree in some sort of cultural studies thing, but is sort of underemployed. Um, but it's like, but there's surprisingly a lot of people who fit in that
Yeah.
category. You know what I mean? Like, it's not a small percentage of the American population in a certain respect. It's a lot of people who live in cities kind of have that kind of thing. And I don't know. Uh, I think basically that you know the world of book publishing for fiction has not been in an especially good way for a really long time. But I mean, but this has been the case forever, right? Like,
Yeah.
Melville's Moby Dick was poorly received in 1851, right? I mean, and many of our, sort of greatest writers of the last several centuries were not really like, respected in their day, or some of them were, but only by certain people, and they didn't sell a lot of books, whatever. I mean, one of the
Joshua
best-selling books of the last
Cohen's
many years was The Secret, right? Like I think about that all the time. That this horrible, terrible, silly book is like one of the best sellers in book history. Anyway, go ahead.
Joshua Cohen's Book of Numbers, I think, is a major novel, like major novel. I read I read it, loved it. None of the reviewers read it
I was yeah.
because none of them talk about the character Mo, who is one of the most interesting, funny characters in an American novel in a really long time. and none of the reviewers mention him because it happens in the middle of the novel. You can tell a reviewer didn't read a book when he only mentions stuff from the beginning and the very end.
It's interesting. So I was having the thought like the other day when people were posting predictions about the Nobel, whatever. Where I was like, on the one hand,
I said Jordan Castro is going to get it, by the way. I'm sorry it didn't happen, but
I agree. One day. But
that's a spirit.
yeah. But but I was thinking that like, one way, so because I tend to like, agree it seems really obvious to be like, oh my God, the state of publishing is, and it is. I mean, the state of publishing sucks, and the books suck, and the readers suck. It's kind of easy to, it's easy for me to feel that way. But another thought that I had about it was like, there are also a lot of really good writers. I mean, Marilyn Robinson, Ann Carson, John Fosse. Like, there's a lot of Joshua Cohen's great. Ben Lerner, even though the Topeka school, like, yeah, whatever. He's still at least smart and doing interesting things. But the one thing is that like there are just so many writers, and you see them a lot. You know what I mean? Like, you see them online. It feels very oppressive to know that, like, I think I don't know. It's many thousands of people every year get MFAs. And that's like way too. That's so many people. And there are so many books that get published. And so I think it's just with the availability of just seeing it all happen on the internet or something like that. I've been wondering if it is just skewed, where there is this mass of ideological mediocrities, but like on the whole, sort of at the top, there are still some pretty good writers or something, like at the top. I mean, it sounds like a weird
But
thing to
not
say.
just at the top. Like, I just read a
Right, well,
novel.
right.
First
Not just
time
at
is
the
a
top.
first novel by Sally Thomas, who's also a poet, called Works of Mercy. Really cool book. I liked it a lot. Powerful book. It's like a Catholic novel, very Catholic novel. It's like, oh, people are still writing like good Catholic novels. That's cool. And it's published by Wise Blood Books, which is one of these sort of print on demand small publishers, of which there are a ton. Like, this is sort of a new thing of actually these small publishers using, yeah, print on demand books aren't as nice as like a well printed book, but it opens up possibilities that otherwise aren't there. That, I don't know. I think there's actually a lot of interesting things happening like that.
That's exactly right. Yeah. I want to just really quick amend my statement that I completely agree. There are like also a lot of really great writers. Honor Levy, Walt John Pierce, Sans Brady, I don't know, just shout them all out. But Nicolette, my wife, obviously, phenomenal, just the greatest. But there's like there are a lot of Scott. I mean, there's tons of there are a lot of really good writers. And so yes, sorry, I just wanted to like interject and not just.
But at the same time, I think the field is open. Like, that there are lots of great writers doing things, but none of whom are able to find big audiences. It also might just be that like the medium of books, as much as I am committed to it and love it, has, is now just going to be like an audience size in the same way of like vinyl records or something, which have kind of had a mini resurgence and will presumably stick around forever, but not going to have like a mass audience anymore, which is fine.
But some do sell though. You know what I mean? Like,
I
there are
know,
books
I
that sell
know.
a ton. And so like I think I'm not sure. I'm not sure what it is.
But in any case, I think the field is open.
Mhm.
Like, there's really nothing stopping people from writing books and getting them published. I think there's this idea that there's all these like hidden choices that the big bad publishing houses are like rejecting and are never seeing the light of day. I think that's totally fake. There's no way that people are writing like really great serious novels who can't find a publisher somewhere. There's so many publishers now. Or honestly, if it's that good, just publish it. You can find there's nothing stopping you from doing it. And I think that was the fun twist of like the stuff we were talking about earlier. I'm just opening up that possibility of like, yeah, you can just make books and literary journals with your friends. There's like nothing, there's no technical limitation. You don't have to ask anyone for permission. You don't have, there's nothing stopping people from doing that.
Turns out that DIY punk rock was right all along, you know?
Yeah.
And DIY punk rock, you know where DIY punk rock thrived in large part? The great state of Ohio.
That's very true. Yeah. Yeah.
Like
In my
every one of
mind,
those major cities had something.
yeah.
Mm.
You guys have, I know you gotta go, Joey, so we can bounce. You did either of you guys ever go to Berea Fest in Ohio?
Berea Fest. I've been to Berea, Ohio, but I never went to that festival.
I was just curious.
Never went to Berea Fest. I did have friends who used to go to Skatopia back in the day. You ever know about that place?
I know about it. I never went. That's in Ohio, right? Like Southern Ohio?
It's like Southern Ohio, like in the Appalachian part of it. And apparently it was just like some crazy guy had this plot of land where he built like a small rinky dink DIY skate park. And they would have a big festival every year where just like loads of teenagers would come from like the whole Ohio Valley and like set things on fire and do way too many drugs and skateboard. And it mostly was horrible, I think. But was also like a staple of my teenagehood in Huntington, West Virginia. So
I got invited.
Our late friend Anthony used to organize Crucial Fun Fest every year in Kentucky. I don't know if you ever went to Crucial Fun Fest, Jordan.
I've heard of it. I've heard of it, but I don't think I ever went. Yeah.
Yeah, it was really something.
Nice. Up the punks.
Okay, well, hey, Joey's got to go, so I think we should wrap this up. So thank you so much, Jordan Castro, author of The Novelist, a novel which, apparently can be talked about in the same breath as with Dostoevsky and Dante. And so I don't know. We'll have to check back in a few centuries and see how that's holding up.
Joey's a really smart guy. I think he's probably right.
what can I say?
I have to say the funniest part of the novel is when the character is talking about you.
Yeah.
Character is like musing about how like handsome you are and how great your Twitter is and so on. All right, so thank you, Jordan, for coming on. And
yeah, man, thanks for doing this.
Thus ends another installment of the Doomer Optimism Literary Hour.